Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Sardar Patel Institute, Ahmedabad. Today we'll study the module Introduction to Physiological Anthropology under the paper Physiology and Sports Anthropology. So students, let's learn about the objectives we are going to learn from this particular module. The very first objective is to understand the concept of physiology, to have an idea about its history and the origin, and then to know about the interrelationship of physiology and physiological anthropology by knowing about their scopes. And in the last, we'll understand about the concept of homeostasis, and which is an important defining feature of the physiology. What is physiology? Now let's understand the concept of physiology. It's the science of life which endeavors to appreciate the mechanism of living from the molecular basis of cell function to the integrated behavior of the whole body with a holistic approach. Due to the recurrent association between the body forms and the function, the physiology and the anatomy are essentially linked, and both the subjects are studied in tandems as a part of medical program. Much of the foundation of knowledge in human physiology was provided by the experiments being done on the animals. So, we can call physiology as an experimental science that forms the basis for biological and clinical sciences, which gives an explanation to the detection, prevention and treatment of the diseases. The research in physiology facilitates in not only understanding the working of our body, but it also comprehends what goes wrong in the disease status of an individual and to identify the new treatment concept for those particular diseases. Now let's talk about the history and origin of physiology. Physiological studies date back to the ancient civilization of India. Most of the archaeological and historical records tells us that human physiology as a discipline started somewhere around 420 BC in ancient Greece at the Hippocratic school of medicine. Hippocrates, Aristotle, Claudius Galenus and Jean Fernel were the major contributors towards the physiological studies. Now, there are many sporadic landmarks during the earlier century until the advent of 19th century when physiology started making rapid advancement. Matthew Sheldon, Theodore Chachwan, Claude Bernard, Walter Cannon, Joseph Lister, Henry Bowditch and Ivan Pavlov made this significant impact on the physiology and the related studies. With the advance of the 20th century, there were many evidences which tells us about the advent of comparative physiology and ecophysiology, with the significant contributions from numerous scientists. For instance, the Schmidt Nielsen, George Bartholomew, John Jacob Abel, Takamin Haldane, Charles Best, Frederick Benting, Alan Hodgkin, Christian Bernard, Lapchi Soe, Jack Riordan, Francis Galton and Paul Nurse. They made the impact on the physiological studies. The Hippocrates is known as the father of medicines, and he, along with his students, wrote extensively on the physiology, and he established medicines as its own discipline in a full-fledged form. Aristotle, whose focus was on the relationship between structure and functions, is regarded as the pioneer of physiology. The treasured thoughts of Aristotle and his stress on the relationship between structure and function marked an establishment of physiology in ancient Greece. Claudius Galenus, popularly known as Galen, a prominent Greek physician in ancient Rome, dissected animals, and he established himself an expert anatomist and physiologist. According to him, monkeys who walked on two legs would probably provide researchers with an information that can be applicable to the human beings. Galen, who is also known as the founder of experimental physiology, was the first to use experiments to probe the functions of the human body. Jean Fernel, a French physician, introduced the term physiology for the first time. Malthus Schedon and Theodore Chachwan, who were the founders of the cell theory, they told that every living thing or organisms are made up of cells, which are the basic units, and these cells are the basic structural and functional unit of everything that lives. Claude Bernard, a French physiologist, further proposed and discovered a concept of milieu interior, that is, an environment within an individual, by which he refers to the extracellular fluid environment which can protect the tissues and organs of multicellular living organisms, including the human being. It was American physiologist Walter Cannon during 1871 who named the by homeostasis. Cannon meant the maintenance of steady states in the body and the physiological processes through which they are regulated. Joseph Lister worked on the reasons for blood coagulation and inflammation in the human body that arose following the injuries and surgical wounds. He later discovered antiseptics whose properties could dramatically reduce the surgical mortality rates. During the 1870s, the Harvard University, USA, started a medical physiology program, and Henry Bowditch was its first full-time faculty member. Ivan Pavlov in 1891 was famous for his Pavlov experiment, who observed that how dogs' saliva production would respond to various sounds and other stimuli. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology in 1904. It was during this time that the scientists showed increased interest in how non-human beings function. 20th century witnessed the advent of comparative physiology and ecophysiology. Knut Schmidt Nelson, on the left hand side you can see, and the photographs on the right hand shows the George Bartholomew. They are the prominent physiologists of this field, and its advances led to the evolutionary physiology becoming a distinct sub-discipline. The first hormone, adrenaline, from adrenal gland to be identified and synthesized was done in 1901 by John Jacob Abel and Jokichi Takamine. In 1911, J.S. Haldane and other respiratory physiologists climbed to the Pike Peak to study the effect of altitude on human breathing mechanism. Charles Best and Frederick Banting, who won the Nobel Prize in 1923, isolated the hormone insulin in the dogs. Their significant study turned the diabetes from a deadly disease to a chronic one. Andrew Huxley and Alan Hodgkin in 1952 discovered the ionic mechanism, which showed the nerve impulse can be transmitted. With the advances in the physiological studies of the heart, Christian Barnard from South Africa performed the first successful human transplant in 1967. Physiologists during 1960s realized that there was a sharp fall in blood pressure in snake bite victims, which resulted in their fainting. Continued work resulted in the isolation of a compound in the snake venom that blocked the ACE, an enzyme that control blood pressure. ACE here refers to angiotensin converting enzyme. Consequently, research on ACE inhibitors, drugs for controlling the hypertension, that is high blood pressure, were developed and later approved by the US FDA. The discovery of cystic fibrosis gene by Lap Chi Soy, Jack Riordan, and Francis Collin was done in 1989. Paul Nurse, Len Hartwell, and Timothy Hunt in 2001 discovered the mechanism that regulates the cell growth, their division, and the death of an individual. Now let's talk about what is human physiology. Human physiology, as we all know, is a study of the physiological functions of the human being. It is the scientific study of normal body function to understand the cause and effect mechanism of how cells, tissues, organs, and body systems work in a healthy state. The human physiology seeks to understand the mechanism that works to keep the human body alive and functioning through scientific inquiry into the nature of mechanical, physical, and biochemical functions of humans, their organs, and the cells of which they are composed of. The principal level of focus of physiology is at the level of organs and organ systems within the system. Human physiology is a study of normal biological functions from the basic unit, that is cell, to the tissues, from tissues to the organs, and organs to organ system, as well as how the organism as a whole accomplishes particular task essential to life. In the study of physiology, the emphasis is on mechanism, on exactly how a particular function is performed in the body. Human physiology is a part of more general science of mammalian physiology, which is a subcategory of vertebrate physiology. The study of human physiology gains significance because it is the major scientific foundation of medicine and other health applications. This relationship is recognized by the Nobel Prize Committee, which awards prizes in a category called physiology or medicine. It is a useful discipline for an understanding of physiological processes and mechanisms basic to all health professions. Now let's see what is homeostasis, a defining feature of physiology. An understanding of human physiology remains incomplete without the mention of homeostasis. During Aristotle's era, physicians agreed that food health was one way or another linked to a balance among the multiple life-sustaining forces in the body. It took rather a very long time to understand this process. The advent of ordinary microscope led to the breakthrough that the human body is composed of trillions of cells, and each of the cell is packaged to allow movement of certain substances at the same level and not others to move across the cell membrane. During the 19th and 20th centuries, it became evident that most cells are in bond with the interstitial fluid, which in turn was found to be in the state of flux with water and solutes like ions and gases moving back and forth through it between the cell interiors and the blood in nearby capillaries. Another interesting characteristic that came into notice was that most of the common physiological variables found in healthy organisms, such as human blood pressure, body temperature, and blood-borne factors such as oxygen, glucose, and sodium ions, are maintained within a predictable range despite the changes in external environmental conditions. It was Claude Bernard who came up with the constant internal environment that is a prerequisite for food health. This concept was further refined by American physiologist Walter Cannon, who coined the term homeostasis to this process. Homeostasis is a major aspect with regard to the interaction within the plants as well as the animals. With changes start to occur, sensory information evokes physiological responses that act to defend the internal environment against the changes. Thus, much of the physiology involves the study of physiological mechanism that maintains the homeostasis. Homeostasis may be defined as the dynamic constancy of the internal environment. The term dynamic and constant seem contradictory. However, this definition of homeostasis refers to the active, dynamic, physiological control processes that must fight changes in order to maintain relatively constant condition within our body. The internal environment here refers to such conditions as deep body temperature, blood volume, and concentration of different molecules, blood pressure, and many other. It is clearly understood that homeostasis as a state of reasonably stable balance between physiological variables, but then it's too simple a fact to what it is. In fact, there is nothing like physiological variable that is constant over long periods of time. Rather, some variables fluctuate widely on an average value during the day, yet surprisingly are said to be in balance. This is possible because homeostasis is a dynamic and not a static process. Now let's understand the variation in the concentration of glucose in the blood during a day. After taking a meal, carbohydrates in food are broken down in the intestine into glucose molecules, which are then absorbed across the intestinal epithelium and released into the blood. Consequent to it, blood glucose levels rise significantly within a short time after eating. Now, if we talk of a stable or static internal environment, then such a huge variation in the blood level of glucose is not consistent with the idea. What holds significance is that once the concentration of glucose in the blood increases, compensatory mechanism brings back the glucose level to the level it was before the meal. These homeostatic compensatory mechanism nonetheless exceeds any considerable degree in the opposite directions, which means that the blood glucose level generally do not decrease below the permissible level, or even if they do so, it's only slightly. In the case of glucose, the endocrine system is foremost accountable for this adjustment, but then number of control systems may commence to regulate other processes. Now let's understand the scope and applications of the physiological anthropology. The human cardiovascular physiology and health status constitute a significant aspect in our system. For instance, monitoring the blood pressure as a continuum of cardiovascular risk across levels provide us a framework for differentiating the levels of various risk associated and for defining the treatment thresholds and the associated therapeutic goals with those problems. Similarly, another parameter, that is the heart rate, which is another linked parameter to the cardiovascular efficiency. This parameter proves to be a best predictor after the problem of myocardial infarction in the patients with congestive heart failure sort of cases, as well as this parameter is quite good predictor among the patients with the type 2 diabetes, that is diabetes mellitus or hypertension. The cardiorespiratory fitness is generally considered the most important component of various health related fitness, and it is considered to be a major predictor of the hypertension threat among people. The elevated level of our cardiorespiratory fitness regularly neutralizes the increased mortality allied with the elevated blood pressure and reduce risk of developing the hypertension among healthy normotensive persons, that is the people with the normal blood pressure. So the physiological anthropology science aids in studying the adaptation of an individual or adaptation of human cardiorespiratory functions with the varied environmental conditions, for instance, extensive heat, extensive cold and the high altitude. So it helps us to study how do different parameters changes with the changes in these environmental parameters. The science of physiological anthropology also facilitate in understanding the impact of air pollution or noise pollution or different kind of changes in the environment on our cardiorespiratory functions or our cardiorespiratory efficiency. Many physiologists are actively involved in the research work on the physiological foundation of a wide range of diseases like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and so on. Some diseases where physiology has gone wrong of an individual. That means the normal physiological actions or functions do not take place, or we can call it a pathophysiological condition. In such cases, the understanding of the physiology is very important for the practice and the study of the medicine and the health sciences. Now let's discuss the scope and applications of physiological anthropology. Physiology is the study of how living organisms function, and with respect to human being, its scope has wide spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, it includes the study of individual molecules, for example, how a particular protein's shape and electrical properties allow it to function as a channel for ions to move into or out of a cell. Hence, physiologists' concern lie in the function and integration. How parts of the body work in concert at various levels down to individual molecules of organization and consequently in the entire organism, so as to gain to an understanding of the function of the whole body. According to the Claude Bernard, after carrying out an analysis of phenomena, we must always reconstruct our physiological synthesis so as to see the joint action of all the parts we have isolated. The interaction of human physiological fitness and environment with respect to their health and morbidity play an important role. In the past decade, the growing epidemic of health risk has led to health promotion strategies focused solely on behavioral change and towards the ecological approaches that engage communities in fostering environment and behavioral changes. This general trend coincides with the increased popularity of interdisciplinary and participatory approaches to health promotion, creating new opportunities for anthropologists to play a role in community health promotion. The health promotive capacity of an environment is understood not simply in terms of the health effect of separate environmental features like air quality, seismic safety, or social climate, but more broadly as the cumulative impact of multiple environmental conditions or occupants' physical, emotional, and social well-being over a specific time interval. It is undeniable that plenty of new physiological information and understanding is in offing due to significant landmark sequencing of the human genome. The application to the working of the cell and organ systems will offer an ever sharper view of how bodies work the moment the function of protein encoded by the genome are revealed. The assimilation of molecular biology with physiology has led to the need for a new term to describe the growing area of research, that is physiological genomics, an upcoming area of research with molecular biology answering the questions on changes and mechanism at the level of genes in the body in reaction to some external or internal stimulus. So, students, let's summarize what we have learned in this module from Introduction to Physiological Anthropology. So far we have studied that the physiological studies date back to ancient civilization of India. People from the 420 BC or in fact before that are working on the study of physiology. Physiology is the science of life which endeavors to appreciate the mechanism of living from the molecular basis of life, of cell function to the integrated behavior of whole body with a holistic approach. And as we have seen that so many people have contributed towards the field of physiology and physiological anthropology. To name a few is Aristotle, Galen, and Hippocrates, and so on and so forth. So the scope and applications also we have studied in the details, which is going to contribute a lot to the health and the medical sciences in the coming future. And it can make the life of an individual or especially the human beings much easier and much smoother. Thank you.